nature recycles. So this is why scientists can assume that life on other planets tends to follow a certain rule as well. Welcome to another episode of Pandora Through a Biologist's Eyes. For this episode, we're gonna tackle something, well, more or less big, but also basic, to get a better understanding, of course, about the whole blueprint of the animals that are living, or the general wildlife that we have on Pandora. But before we start, let's have a quick recap about life on Earth and what would be considered our blueprint. So ever since our ancestors, started out as life on Earth, then we have single-cell organisms, multi-cell organisms. We're going to skip a few steps. Then we have fish. Those fish decided at some point, life on land might be interesting. So, crawled out there. There were already some insect-likes because way before then, like a little other group of more arthropod-like animals decided to, explore the land, the dry land too. So now we have fish crawling out of the water, and they become more amphibian-like. So now we have amphibians, and what the comparison between amphibians and fish are, they have legs and they have those like toes and fingers, or like just generally limb structures, which fish do not have. They do have their fins, but they are not capable to move around land quite efficient as, for example, compared to amphibians. So the basic blueprint that we now have, amphibians. And starting earlier with fish, they get 2 eyes, they have nostrils, they have a mouth, and they have, in case of fish, lungs, but then we have, of course, lungfish, and amphibians have lungs. So our breathing apparatus is pretty, straightforward. It goes in through nose or mouth, depending on the species, and then, of course, the 2 eyes. So this is the very basic blueprint if we start from frogs. So now all of the animals coming after, so we had reptilians. If we're gonna follow the way of the mammal, we got reptilian-like mammals, or mammal-like reptilians, I should say. Then those started to become mammals, or proto-mammals, then mammals. So what classifies a mammal? So we pretty much, if you look at our skeleton compared to a reptile, we still have the 4 legs, we still have the 2 eyes, we still have the nose, and we still have the mouth. Also, of course, lung breathers. Well, mammals, of course, big thing is that we can give life to, or give birth to live youngs. So we do have, the necessity to need eggs anymore, because reptilians had eggs, and the eggs had hard shells, and for reptilians became birds. So their young could survive on dry land, which, for example, frogs and fish eggs cannot. They have to, or they are dependent on water. So, next step, we're mammals, we're hairy, we got little claws, we're still running around on 4 legs. Now the meteorite hits, dinosaurs are gone, the mammals have a more or less open landscape and they can evolve into different branches. Still, the basic mammals at this time are still more or less 4-legged, they're small, you could call them like rodent, rat-like, but the blueprints are already there for them to branch off into different groups. So now if we follow the groups of the primates, firstly they look like squirrel-like, like little hairy rodents, rodent-like I should say. Then they become more monkey-like over time. They start having long tails, less bushy. They get their thumbs, not really claws anymore, but getting closer to the fingernails that we know of. And of course, keep going with the primates. They start to get, the typical, let's call them the typical primate noses. Instead of those soft cat-like noses, they become, wet cat-like noses, they become dry noses. Then, of course, they keep splitting off. Some of them find new areas, evolve over there, or go into different directions over there. And then we have us and our closest relatives, who are, of course, the great apes. So our still living relative today is the chimpanzee, closest related relative. And compared to them, the humans split off from the chimpanzees, started to decide, life on trees isn't this good. We're going to stick to the ground. So they started to get the upright walk, and over time lost their hair except for the head, became more upright, our jaws got a bit smaller, our teeth got smaller, we got, less and less hairy over time, we've started to develop in certain directions. But if you look at us and you have our blueprint and you just look at the basics, we are still pretty much the same as a frog. We got the 2 eyes, we got the nostrils, we got the mouth, we got 2 front limbs, we've got 2 back limbs, we have our fingers, we have our toes. So, to see the pattern from a monkey to us, to a cat, to a dog, to a horse, and even a whale. And of course, reptiles and birds. So birds' arms, have become wings. But so have the wings or the arms from bats. But the wings, is convergent evolution, which is also a pretty big player. And convergent evolution is something that is something pretty big because it shows that nature tends to recycle blueprints over time. So wings have separately evolved in insects, in birds, in flying reptiles such as the pterosaurs, but also in, of course, bats. So you see, nature recycles. So this is why scientists, or just in general, we can assume that life on other planets tends to follow a certain rule as well. And then, of course, you have something else that is the limb reduction or generally reduction. Rule of thumb is usually it's easier to lose something than to regain something. So, for example, for birds, it would be pretty tough to regain their ability to use their front legs or front limbs again as legs, as for example their ancestors, the theropod dinosaurs, did. But then, of course, we have legless lizards and snakes who completely, got rid of their legs. They didn't have a need for them. It was more efficient for them to be legless, so they evolved into this form, and they did that separately from each other. So again, convergent evolution. And so did whales, because if you see a whale, they've got those flippers, but they don't have anything in the back. So they only have their tail, but they do not have their hind legs anymore. They're reduced. If you look at early whales, they starting out as I think they were odd-toed ungulates or something, but ungulate-like, split off from them. Then at some point they were like hairy crocodiles, and then they more and more became into the shape and form of whales as we have today. So now I hope you've got basic understanding, or get a little recap of the basic understanding, and if you've already known that, I hope I didn't bore you. So now it's pretty important if we take a look at the animals of Pandora and what their blueprints are. I'm gonna be completely honest with you, I am not going to touch the Navi for this episode because I have a little comparison here. We are really, really similar. And as you can see, they are more closer to, humans than they are to anything that is on Pandora. So now I'm going to show you a few of the animals on Pandora, and I'm going to highlight a few of the, what we could consider the blueprint there. Because if we look at the Pandoran animals, the thing that usually always, the immediate thing we see are the legs. They always, or at least most of the times, have 6 of them. And the front, the legs, the pair in the middle, is generally a copy of the front leg. We have it here too. And we have it here with the carnivores. And again, copies of the front leg. Here you can see actually pretty well the breathing system too. So the next major thing about Pandora, aside having 6 legs, is of course that their breathing system is not nostrils like we have, but they have those openings. And in this case, you can see the back openings here, so it would probably be closer to a gill system. So, air would go in here, would traverse through the chest here, and then exit probably here. So that's the next big thing. So far we have 6 legs, and their breathing system is in these, let's call them like shark-like spherical openings. And of course, if they could close them, they would be more like an operculum from snails, but I'm going to go with the calling them spherical. This one you can see has 1 pair of eyes. And then this one has only 4 limbs and 2 pair of eyes. You can see it over here a little bit. And still the breathing system is with the opening. It's either under there, but they definitely have this opening here. Now with something bigger. Again, 6 legs, opening, and this one has 2 pair of eyes. You can see there's a little pair next to the other pair. So we now can assume that, having 2 pair of eyes might be the, part of the blueprint. This one, for example, has only 1 pair of eyes. And it's also an aerial predator, but again the chest opening is still spherical-like. And it also has only 4 limbs. This is a flying one as well. It has 2 eyes as far as I can tell. And if it would start flying, we would be seeing that it has 4 wings and 2 legs. Now, and as we can see, with even the more, let's call them, going towards more of an amphibian look, they have the typical blueprint, as if we go with the frog analogy from earlier. They have their 6 legs and they have 2 eyes. So if we would apply the logic that we saw or we have on Earth, we would probably assume, so one of the basics might be that they start out, blueprint is having 4 eyes and 6 legs, and of course the chest openings. And so far, with everything, or like all of the animals that we have on Pandora, at least the ones that could be considered closer to, let's call them the chordata animals or tetrapod animals, as in tetrapod meaning 4 legs, so all of the animals, coming from let's call them an amphibian and up, they have the same blueprints. So for them, the blueprint, of course, would be having 4 eyes, and the pretty big thing is their breathing apparatus, of course, which is through these chest organs, maybe some gill-like structures inside, but, they do not have nostrils. They have a mouth, but no nostrils. So now we have this basic blueprint, and they probably started out with 6 legs, but in some cases, like with the flyers, oh no, I deleted it, like with the flyers, some of them, especially the bigger ones, might not have a need for having an extra pair because it might be more difficult to move with them, but it's just speculative at this point. But of course, if it's gone, they probably didn't have a use for it. Because nature or the evolution tends, if something isn't really an advantage, it doesn't really get enforced by natural selection, so it might disappear over time. Or you could even have a disadvantage, for example, how we lost our tails, because primates started out with having a tail, and then they gradually, or just our family, the great apes, they lost the tail, because there was no need for it. Then also we have, the pretty big player in evolution is always natural selection. Like, how does the animal evolve, and why does it look this way? If it's the basics are usually because it has an advantage in its environment. That look, that behavior, that body build had an advantage. So whales, losing their hind legs, becoming more streamlined, losing their hair, is an advantage for them. Or also for an animal to grow big and get bigger over time is an advantage. Or for horses, if we look at them, started out tiny, and then they became bigger and bigger, started from, walking on multiple toes to just walking on 1 toe, and then, the nail of the toe being the hoof. So it was an advantage for them to become this way. So, pretty big, factor is natural selection. Why are, polar bears white? Why are, why, started some animals become, from small to big or from big to small? Why do some animals have certain structures? Why did they lose their legs? Why did they evolve wings? They had an advantage, and if you have an advantage, you can usually survive, and then you can reproduce. So now coming to the other pretty big, driver, that is sexual selection. Because maybe if you look at this one here, It has those structures on the top of its head, ignoring the big hammerhead. I'm talking about those nice colorful ones. And that usually is sexual selection. If something looks like the animal has a big disadvantage and it doesn't seem to serve a purpose, for example, if we have those colorful thingies up there, okay, it might be effective for communication. But it could also be that the potential partner finds it attractive. So this individual, if it has a bigger crest and it's shinier, more colorful, has a better advantage in finding a breeding partner and therefore spreading its genes. We also have big structures, like we have those shovel or hammer-shaped horns, which could be, of course, or usually in animals that have this, it's a mix out of natural and sexual selection. Because if we look at the deer, for example, almost all of the deer species, the females do not have antlers. The males do, but with the males, for females, they would have maybe been, efficient or give them an advantage in natural selection, but apparently it did not because they don't have them, except for reindeer. So in reindeer, it was an advantage for the females to also have antlers. So therefore, reindeer are a species of deer where both sexes have antlers. But if we look at a red deer or a moose or elk or wapiti, whatever you want to call it, only the males have antlers, and that is, having big, strong antlers, makes surviving a bit tougher because you need to put a lot of resources in there. You need to grow them. They might make it harder to escape from a predator if they're weighing you down or if you get stuck in shrubs. But in this case, the females find it more attractive compared to a male with smaller antlers, and therefore we have the other big driver, and that is sexual selection. Another good example are, of course, our colorful peacocks. Because peacocks have, of course, the big feathers in the back that they use to impress mates. Of course, we can have colorful, not color in animals. If usually both sexes have it, does not necessarily mean that it is sexual selection, which of course it could be, but it could also mean that the animals are showing I'm poisonous, don't touch me. But generally, it is with this category would also fall, of course, under natural selection. So two pretty big players. So now, with all of the animals that we just talked or glanced over, you've got a understanding about the basic blueprint about the life on Pandora. So of course, every call them the higher life forms, which would equal the tetrapods that we have on Earth. They have the blueprint, which is in all of the cases I've seen so far, having their breathing apparatus be at the chest. They have those chest openings that we talked about earlier. But of course, then they have a varying number of limbs and eyes. But just by looking at the ones that I would consider being like earlier stages, they probably started out with those two pair of eyes, and then at some point they didn't have a need for those two pair of eyes, so they just have one pair of eye. But same goes for the limbs. They probably started out with having 6 of them, and at some point they lost the need for it. And if you look at some of them, you could also assume the same with the tail, because some of them, of course, have a long tail, which in this case would be an advantage for flying. And others, of course, have lost their tail, and they don't really have a need for that. I'm gonna go into more, the advantages of biological structures at another point. So for this episode, I basically just wanted to talk about the basic blueprints that we have on Pandora to give you a better understanding about the blueprints, of course, that we have on Earth too, and give you a better understanding. And what is, of course, very unique to Pandora and the concept of Pandora is that they have these neural appendages that you can see here flopping around, and they're always in pairs. And they can use that for communication, or as we see with the dire horse, they can also use that for giving them an easier time by finding, for example, food, by using them as sensors, or antennae, for example, like ants would do, or moths using their antennae. So now I hope you have a better understanding why the Navi are really, definitely deserve their own video, because they really, really look different from everything on Pandora, because they're very human-like. And of course, I got a bunch of theories why that is, and I'll almost definitely talk about that in another video. But as I said, for now, I hope that you have a better understanding, or a basic understanding, and maybe some, insight of how, evolution tends to work on Earth, and how it is assumed to work on other planets too. And in this case, we're using the example of Pandora, which of course is speculative biology, but, that nature is always recycling her ideas, that it is a good idea to, or not a good idea, but help the understanding of using what we know about animals on Earth, that we could maybe use it on other planets too. So I hope you learned something interesting. I hope you found it interesting. And if you have any questions, you can always let me know in the comments. And if you have any other ideas that you wanna see in the future, also just let me know in the comments. And with that, I'm gonna say goodbye and have a great day.